Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. In early 2025, Washington fired what it believed was a perfectly calibrated financial nuclear option, expecting one decisive move to cripple Venezuela's oil engine and force political collapse. Instead, the strike backfired, igniting a geopolitical chain reaction that handed China unprecedented leverage in the Western Hemisphere. What began as an economic squeeze quickly shifted into tanker seizures, military escalations, and a high-stakes struggle for the world's largest crude reserves. The U.S. anticipated obedience. What it triggered was a global realignment. Here are the developments fueling this geopolitical earthquake. Sanctions backfire. Washington accidentally ignites a global oil shockwave. When Washington rolled out its April 2025 secondary tariffs, U.S. policymakers believed they had crafted the geopolitical equivalent of a compression ratio so tight no country could afford to resist. Any nation caught buying even a single barrel of Venezuelan oil would face a 25% tariff on every export it sent to the U.S., from Korean electronics to European wine to Latin American agricultural products. Overnight, global trade lanes were supposed to fall in line. Chevron's license was pulled, erasing over 100,000 barrels per day of heavy crude that U.S. Gulf Coast refineries were literally engineered to process. Washington saw this as necessary detonation in its strategy to choke Venezuela's revenue stream. But the architects of this financial engine overlooked a critical mechanic. The world is no longer running on a unipolar powertrain. They assumed the U.S. still held the only ignition key. Instead, the sanction cleared the field, leaving one buyer perfectly positioned to take the wheel: China. And that miscalculation still reverberates like detonation knock. And China did not hesitate. Its next move would redefine Venezuela's entire oil future. China's stealthy oil coup, from buyer to strategic power broker. Beijing saw opportunity where others saw risk. By 2025, Chinese exports to the U.S. were already weighed down by years of tariffs, meaning Washington's new 25% penalty barely registered. With global competitors fleeing, Venezuela's stranded oil became a bargain only China was positioned to seize. Then came the decisive move. In September 2025, China conquered resources, installed a major offshore platform, the Alula Jackup, on Lake Maracaibo, reviving fields long considered dead. Under a rare 20-year production sharing deal, China gained operational control of more than 500 wells, flying in engineers and crews to reopen old sites and launch new drilling. Output, once collapsed to 12,000 barrels a day, is projected to reach 60,000 by 2026. This wasn't opportunism, it was long-term strategy. After upgrading ties to an all-weather strategic partnership in 2023, China had the political and economic framework to ignore U.S. pressure entirely. Sanctions didn't isolate Venezuela, they handed China the blueprint for its oil rebirth. Before we delve deeper, do us a favor and smash that like and subscribe button. This helps us reach even more auto enthusiasts who love stories powered by engines, energy, and geopolitics. And as China rebuilt Venezuela's oil future, a deeper and more permanent bond was already locking into place. Oil for debt trap: how China locked Venezuela's future. China's grip on Venezuela isn't anchored in short-term deals, it's welded into long-term financial architecture. Over the past decade, Caracas accumulated more than $60 billion in Chinese loans, but these debts are not repaid in currency. They are repaid in crude. That means Venezuela must send oil to China regardless of sanctions, market disruptions, or diplomatic pressure. Those barrels are essentially pre-sold before they ever leave the ground. By late 2025, up to 90% of Venezuela's exports were flowing toward China via direct shipments and ship-to-ship transfers. December tanker data pegged exports at 966,000 barrels per day, the highest in nearly a year, and China absorbed almost all of it. Beijing then doubled down. In November 2025, both nations signed a sweeping zero-tariff agreement covering hundreds of product lines, drawing Venezuela deeper into China's industrial ecosystem. This is no longer simple trade. its structural integration. Washington can sanction oil flows, but it cannot sanction debt repayment. And that makes China's influence effectively permanent. And with China cementing the economic foundation, Washington responded the only way it knew how, by escalating the pressure far beyond the financial realm. U.S. military escalation, seizures, warships, and a region on edge. As China tightened its hold on Venezuela's oil sector, Washington shifted from economic pressure to direct military action. In December 2025, U.S. forces carried out a dramatic operation, seizing a massive crude tanker off Venezuela's coast. Footage from Attorney General Pam Bondi showed Marines and Coast Guard teams fast roping onto the deck, intercepting a vessel allegedly transporting sanctioned Venezuelan and Iranian oil. Caracas condemned the move as international piracy, with Maduro urging citizens to resist the North American empire. The seizure was only one of more than 20 U.S. maritime strikes in recent months across the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, actions Venezuela says killed civilian fishermen. The U.S. has now deployed its largest regional force since the Cuban Missile Crisis, including F-35s, the USS Gerald R. Ford, and over 15,000 personnel. Analysts warn Washington may be positioning for an oil blockade, already driving up global prices. China sharply condemned the escalation, a response that only deepened its strategic alignment with Venezuela. And this alignment leads us to the bigger picture, how Venezuela became the test track for a new multipolar world. A new power map. Venezuela becomes the multipolar test case. Viewed from a wider lens, Venezuela has become a vivid illustration of a shifting global power structure. Washington entered the crisis with an outdated assumption that no major nation could withstand U.S. sanctions, that access to the American market was irreplaceable, and that military pressure would eventually force compliance. Instead, Venezuela, backed by China, proved the world has moved into a multipolar era where alternatives now exist. China's economic, industrial, and diplomatic networks rival America's reach. Its willingness to invest in sanctioned environments, absorb discounted commodities, and plan decades ahead gives nations like Venezuela an escape route from U.S. pressure. Across the region, the trend is visible. Brazil's trade leans toward China, Argentina pursues Chinese infrastructure deals, and even Mexico resists American demands to distance itself from Beijing. Venezuela is not just an oil dispute, it is a geopolitical warning shot. For the first time in generations, the U.S. must navigate a hemisphere where another superpower holds real, expanding leverage. And that brings us to the final verdict, what this battle truly means for global power. Verdict: the battle for oil dominance has just begun. The fight over Venezuela's oil industry has shifted from a sanctions play to a full-scale geopolitical test drive shaping the next global order. Washington expected its financial nuclear option to stall Venezuela's engine entirely. Instead, Beijing stepped in as the financier, builder, operator, and protector, reviving oil fields, absorbing exports, and anchoring Venezuela into its expanding sphere of influence. Every U.S. escalation only tightened that alignment, revealing a reality few in Washington wanted to acknowledge. Power in the Western Hemisphere is no longer running on a single supercharged American motor. This is no longer just an oil conflict. It's a contest of influence, alliances, and endurance. China is proving it can outmaneuver U.S. sanctions while building long-term energy leverage. The U.S., meanwhile, now faces a hemisphere it cannot fully command, one where military pressure risks pushing rivals closer together. Before we wrap up, we want to hear from you. Do you think the U.S. underestimated China's long-term energy strategy? Is Venezuela now permanently locked into China's orbit, or can Washington still shift the balance? And what does this emerging multipolar map mean for the next decade of global energy battles? Share your thoughts below. Your insights drive this channel forward. And don't forget to subscribe to Piston Pundit to get notified about our next vehicle updates and upcoming videos. Thanks for watching and see you next time. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's plenty more to explore.